One of the biggest arguments about people not buying XRP is simply because of the escrow. A lot of people actually think that XRP is not decentralized. They think that it's actually centralized because of the Ripple escrow. I've had conversations with a lot of people outside of crypto on why they don't invest into XRP. They hold Bitcoin, they hold Ethereum, but they don't hold XRP. And I question why. And almost all the time, they do mention something about how Ripple is in control of the network, so they don't think that it's valuable, or, they think that Ripple is selling XRP. But this is probably one of the biggest misconceptions. When we think about the XRP escrow, this is essentially Ripple's war chest. Okay. I get that almost every single month we get an update about how Ripple is unlocking 1 billion tokens and oh, it's going to affect XRP's price. It's going to drop it because they're going to sell it and this, that, whatever. But if we actually look into a few things, we could see exactly what the escrow is used for. And I'm going to get into this here in a second. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how much escrowed XRP is out there. It's about 36.5 billion XRP fully escrowed out of the 99.98 billion XRP totally available. And we could also track the escrow wallets, by the way. We could see in escrow here, and we could see the amounts. And if you scroll down, you could see all of them. There's a lot more even down here as well. But for the most part, the biggest ones to really kind of focus on are the Ripple wallets, which are typically always labeled Ripple. Now, do I think that this is a big concern? Do I think that Ripple owning a big supply like this in escrow is, a problem? Is it an argument to say like, oh, XRP is centralized? No, we got to understand that it's escrowed. This is all locked. And even though, people think that, oh, this means that it is centralized because of how much Ripple is holding, you got to understand that there's mechanisms around the escrow that technically make XRP still decentralized. XRP is 100% decentralized, and we've talked about this on multiple occasions, even using highlights from David Schwartz. We've talked about it even with Brad Garlinghouse. But what's crazy about this is we go over here to Anderson's post, right? And this is where we start to kind of see things open up a little bit about what's really happening around the escrow. So Ripple having large XRP holdings is a feature, not a bug. It ensures Ripple is financially incentivized to push for XRP adoption as much as possible. If Ripple held no XRP or just a small amount, they would have no financial incentive to push for XRP adoption and no reason to prioritize XRP over any other chain, other than specific features of XRPL. Having large holdings of a coin is the best predictor of any person and entity pushing for adoption. Just think of the Ethereum mafia, for an example, from the obscured ICO days, or Michael Saylor with Bitcoin. If they held no Ethereum or Bitcoin, do you really think that they would push for adoption of those cryptos? The answer is obvious. Now, on top of that, we have this video below is from a former Ripple employee who was responsible for XRP markets and building liquidity. If you want to understand why Ripple holding so much XRP is massively beneficial to Ripple and XRP adoption in general, you need to watch the video. So in other words, this is not just some theory I made up myself, but based on statements from Ripple employees. Miguel's main point, thanks to Ripple's large XRP holdings, they can lend XRP to professional market makers at great rates, which is really hard to do with Bitcoin. If there's cross-border corridor that's not competitive enough, liquid enough in terms of the cost going through that corridor and Ripple payments on-demand liquidity, Ripple can incentivize usage by covering the cost difference. Their large XRP and large balance sheet can really help here. Over time, the corridor should become liquid enough with enough volume going through that Ripple will no longer have to subsidize usage in the corridor. He also spells it out for anyone wondering. The more liquidity, the more utility. In theory, over time, the more valuable XRP will be. So utility is directly correlated to XRP price. Someone might have to hear this, even though it may seem obvious, but not to XRP haters. But check this out.
We own 60 billion XRP, the company. Okay. I don't know that Bitcoin or Ethereum is that much more decentralized in terms of holdings. Right? I think Vitalik has a fair bit of Ethereum, right? So does Joe Lubin. The early Bitcoiners have tons, right? I mean, it's of the holdings or 10% of the wallets in Bitcoin up there, some crazy thing like that. So it's a little more private, right? I think ours is a little more public, especially because the company holds so much. What I would say is it puts us in a very interesting position with respect to economics. Because, number one, so my job is building liquidity. One of the ways you do that is you lend XRP to people so that they can provide liquidity in markets. If you want to provide a bid and an offer in a market, you have to have cash to buy something. And if you want to sell it, you have to have the thing to sell. Well, the only way you sell something is either own it or you borrow it. In the Bitcoin space, it's really hard to borrow stuff. It's expensive, 10 to 15% annual interest rates, and it's hard to find like really chunky loans. With XRP, people can just come to us and be like, hey, I want to borrow some XRP. Not anybody, but really professional market makers. It's something that we can do that nobody else can do, right? In that flow that I described where somebody's buying XRP, moving it and selling it, we can guarantee the rates. So everybody always asks me, well, but you're bridging between two fiat currencies. Like you have to do two hops, there's two spreads you're crossing, the liquidity's not great, it's volatile. No problem. I will pay you the difference. If you're going across this rail and it's expensive, I am very much incentivized to make sure that you do that, because the more liquidity, the more utility, in theory over time, the more valuable XRP will be. So in the short run, we're very much incentivized to make all those frictions go away. So I don't see our holdings as a detriment, and I definitely do not care if there are skeptics and skeptics about everything. But it puts us in an incredibly powerful position to actually activate the use case.
And yeah, he's 100% correct here. Like, even when we think about decentralization, like you could look at this and say, oh, well, 36 billion is a massive amount, so it's 100% or centralized. Sorry, not decentralized. But it's very easy to come to that argument by just looking at this and saying, oh, 36.5 billion, Ripple's like top holder in terms of like the top 9 or 8. So XRP is 100% centralized. The same could be said about Bitcoin. The same could be said about Ethereum. Like with Bitcoin, the main thing around centralization arguments is you look at all of the public companies that are tied back to it. The mining companies, for an example. Almost all the mining companies, their top shareholders are like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Master, right? Master Strategies top holders are BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Bitcoin now with the ETFs. All right, well, now you have big players like BlackRock, Fidelity, being some of the largest players around the Bitcoin ETFs. Could we simply argue that Bitcoin is centralized by all of those, stats and factors? We could. I could also even mix in the fact that, miners, like the top miners, it's like about 3 or 4 of them that hold the most hash rate power. I could also go through the wallet list and say, all right, well, the top 10 or the top, 100 hold this much supply. It's very common to have these arguments. The whole argument around decentralization and centralization within this space gets blown out of proportion in a ridiculous way. When we think about XRP, the reason why XRP has been around this long is because of the utility side, but also because of Ripple as well. Ripple has been pushing for XRP to be extremely successful for years now, and it is extremely successful. But also over here from Crypto Area, we have May 9th SBI Audio shareholders presentation clips. The value of XRP held in escrow by Ripple Labs will not be included in the corporate value until a clear valuation is determined through an IPO or other means. Ripple is generating a huge amount of unrealized profits as well. Check this out.
Ripple Lab is held as unlisted shares. The value of XRP held in escrow by Ripple Lab will not be included in the corporate value until a clear valuation is determined through an IPO or other means. If it is included, the profit will surge and will be an extraordinary amount. So assets under management for private equity was approximately 900 billion. We would like to bring it close to 1 trillion as soon as possible. For the crypto asset business, like mentioned earlier, this is a record high in performance. Ever since Mr. Trump was inaugurated, the U.S. has been putting a lot of emphasis on the crypto asset market, which we are grateful for. The reason why we did invest into Ripple more than 10 years ago, which is now generating a huge amount of unrealized profits. If listed, the unrealized profits are going to be unlocked, and I'm sure that it will easily exceed 1 trillion yen. So this is something that may happen. I thought it was a little too early to advance into these segments, but it wasn't. There aren't as many people who understand our operations. Even our employees do not understand our entire business. So maybe general investors do not understand our business perfectly.
It's been a long time since we have invested in a company called Ripple, maybe 10 years. So what is happening to this investment? This is now generating enormous amount of profit. XRP is a currency issued by Ripple. Market cap right now, so XRP is circulating the market, is about 20 trillion yen now. So this is 58.55 billion XRP, which is equivalent to 20 trillion in market cap. And there are still currently Ripple's holdings are not in circulation. That's still under escrow. This is how much. It's right here. So we have about a little less than 10% of the equity stake of Ripple.
So yeah, we could actually see here the max supply and the current Ripple holdings that are not in circulation. You can see the actual XRP and also under escrow as well. But again, when we think about this, yeah, it's very interesting on how they're calculating all of this and how right now the value of XRP held in escrow will not be included in the corporate value until there is a clearer valuation on this through either an IPO or other means. I find this very interesting, especially when we go over here to this post from Digital Asset Investor, where we have, once you hear this clip, crypto price sets or at least controls don't sound so crazy anymore. We use our petroleum stockpile to actually adjust the world price of petroleum. We buy and sell to affect the global price. By having a reserve, we now have both an offensive and a defensive capability to protect the dollar in a new global digital world. And basically what we're hinting at here is the fact that, yeah, XRP could technically be set at a specific value. We have over here that if banks were to adopt Ripple, which means that they would have to purchase XRP, would they not want to keep the market price of XRP low? If XRP is finite, i.e. cannot be minted, then wouldn't that hinder mainstream adoption? And this is from David Schwartz. We have, no, the price of XRP you need to make a $1 million payment will always be at least 1 million. The truth is precisely the opposite. Higher prices tend to correlate with higher liquidity, which means cheaper payments. On the bottom, we have, so a higher priced asset is a better vehicle for payments, at least if you're targeting high value payments. Now, the question is, do we get to the point where XRP becomes so adopted to the point where they want to, set the price or even control the price in a sense to make sure that, number one, we have higher liquidity, which also means that the payments are way cheaper. It could definitely be like that, and it could definitely be something that is a reality considering how much Ripple definitely does hold. But check this out.
Candidate Trump talked about was his frustration with the Biden administration that after they'd seize the crypto, they'd sell the crypto. And he said, look, had they held on to the crypto, we would have billions of dollars that we could use to pay down government debt and otherwise. So he complained that government shouldn't be selling seized crypto. That raises then two issues: crypto stockpiles and crypto reserves. And they have a slight different connotation. Since the beginning of time, we know, going back to ancient Egypt, governments have been stockpiling commodities. Ancient Egypt stockpiled wheat and corn. Today, governments like the United States, like China, stockpile an enormous amount of commodities. China stockpiles pork, stockpiles rebar, stockpiles copper, stockpiles petroleum. The United States stockpiles and reserves petroleum. So governments do this with commodities all the time. They do it for various purposes. The simple one is simply in times of need, they can release the stockpile and it can be used by citizens. But they also use it for strategic purposes. The United States petroleum stockpile is more than a stockpile. It's actually a reserve. And here's where a reserve is different than a stockpile. It's used for strategic purposes. We use our petroleum stockpile to actually adjust the world price of petroleum. We buy and sell to affect the global price. The Biden administration sold down our petroleum reserve dramatically to attempt to bring down the price of oil running into the last election. since the dollar is in part based upon the global price, there's also a monetary impact. And that's why the Trump administration has says we are going to stockpile different currencies, different cryptos, but we're going to reserve Bitcoin. And the reason why we're going to reserve and use Bitcoin strategically for monetary policy purposes is because a number of countries have announced they are going to experiment with a new digital currency that's based upon Bitcoin. And so by having a reserve, we now have both an offensive and defensive capability to protect the dollar in a new global digital world. So it shows a lot of strategic thinking and also recognition that Bitcoin is moved into the realm of being having monetary policy impact. You know, from the beginning of history, most currencies have been stabilized with a commodity. Often that commodity is a metal commodity, silver or gold. It's only in the last 50 years or so, since the United States went off the gold standard in the 1970s, that the United States has experimented with having a true fiat currency not anchored to any commodity. Now, some commentators will argue that no, the dollar still remains based upon a petroleum commodity, but it's still a physical commodity. When in 2017, as chairman of the CFTC, I greenlighted the world's first Bitcoin futures, we were focused on the fact that in the future, commodities, not just physical commodities, but in fact, digital commodities may become anchors for currencies. And I wanted to make sure that the global Bitcoin price was set in dollars, not in any other currency, because the time may come when once again we return to a commodity stabilizer for our money, but this time around that commodity may be a digital commodity, not a physical commodity.
Now, this is from Giancarlo. You know, when we think about the strategic reserve, and also even the strategic stockpile, you know, those are two things that we look at that we have confirmed from this admin, where also XRP is involved. And if you think about that, right, that means that considering we have that strategic stockpile, XRP, we could technically use that XRP just like we use petroleum to adjust the world price of it and set a specific price as well. This could be utilized as a weapon. We could technically weaponize the XRP if we did get a significant amount of it in the stockpile. Now, we do know that they're not going to be buying any more digital assets that are included in that stockpile, but you know, over time, that could definitely change. We could also see Ripple gift the XRP to the US government as well, which could definitely be a possibility, but we have to watch, wait, and see, because that is the war chest around Ripple. But with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, definitely leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications on because of more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord in the description below. And with that being said, guys, it's been Nick. Thanks for watching. Peace out.